Hey everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone's doing well. So, we're shifting our attention back to the tropics because this has been a pretty quick development over here towards the Bay of Campeche, where we have Invest 91L that is now merged over here. We have a 50% chance of this area developing into potentially our next named storm, which would be named Barry. In case anyone might have missed it, we did have Andrea form. Andrea formed out towards the North Atlantic over here. Wasn't really impactful in any kind of way, and it was a quick forming storm, and it dissipated just as quick, if not even quicker. And I would expect this to, for the most part, be the same case over here towards the Atlantic right now. I would say that this will most likely form into Barry within the next couple of days and then most likely end up going over Mexico before dissipating. I don't anticipate this to become a considerably strong storm, but there are a couple wild cards that we will address with this. As far as impacts to the US mainland, wouldn't really be too concerned about that at this point in time. We know that things can change quickly, but I think in this case, there's not really a whole lot to really be worried about. So if you're over towards Texas, Louisiana, anywhere along that Gulf Coast here, I wouldn't be too worried about it right now. Another interesting thing to make note of, and this is just kind of an interesting tidbit for myself, really, is just over here towards the Mexican coastlines, whether it's east or west, it seems like a point of interest right now for this time of year. We have another area over here that's got a 70% chance of developing over towards the Pacific side of Mexico. And this would likely form into the next named storm on that side of the world, being named Flossie here. I make mention of this particularly because the last named storm that we had over here, Erick, actually ended up being a Category 4 that made landfall on the west Mexican coast here. Fortunately, I was working at the time, so I wasn't going to be able to cover that live. I would have loved to, truthfully, but it is what it is. But I don't expect this one to go over towards land. It's still going to cause some heavy rainfall here in this case, but I don't expect any impacts at this time over towards the coastline, which they definitely don't need after a major hurricane impact. But do need to still be watchful as we go forward here. Maybe over towards the Baja might be a point of interest as well. We'll have to see how these winds end up steering this storm ultimately. But if you look on the satellite imagery here, what you'll notice most of all will be the fact that both of these storms are starting to get more and more organized on the satellite imagery here. This is Invest 91L here towards the Bay of Campeche, and you can see how the thunderstorm development has really started to flare up over the last few hours in particular. So this is getting better organized with time. And the same can be said with this one. You can actually see a bit of a circulation developing with the Invest 95E, which is the Eastern Pacific storm here. So I would look for both of these to develop. I definitely would expect this one to become a tropical depression maybe by the end of the weekend. This one I'm a little bit less certain about, and you'll see the reasons as to why that is in just a little bit. So let's go ahead and take a look at the environment as a whole here. We're going to switch gears here. We're going to put the models on. We're looking at wind shear and also kind of looking at the humidity in the atmosphere. We're using the GFS ensemble along with the European ensemble on this one. So some things that I've made note of course, if we look over towards where 95E is, wind shear is very light. I would almost go as far as to say this would be like optimal conditions for tropical development. Not really a whole lot to stop this storm system. If you were to take a look at those sea surface temperatures as well, you can see that it's baking over here. This is bathwater that we have over here towards West Mexico. And this is what the reason why Erick strengthens so rapidly before its landfall is because the waters next to the coast were so warm, and they continue to be so warm. We're nearing about 90 degrees Fahrenheit here. The reason I'm able to figure this out from Celsius because really you would multiply this number that you're seeing here on the screen by 3. It's not the exact number, but you usually get a pretty good rough estimate off this. So seeing 30, so I mean if you do the math, 30 times 3, 90, yikes. Because especially when you consider that the threshold that you would need for tropical development usually starts around about 80 degrees. So yeah, this water right here definitely going to make things a little bit more interesting here and definitely worth keeping an eye on. Now over here towards the Bay of Campeche, wind shear is a little bit light over here, but out ahead the wind shear does pick up, and this is what is made me to believe that this storm is not going to really strengthen all that much. we do get a tropical storm out of it, then I mean that's not all that surprising. But I wouldn't expect any major hurricane out of this or anything like that. I would go as far as to say that I would find a hurricane at this point to be rather unlikely. But like I said, Mother Nature can be full of surprises here, so don't rule anything out. But based off the model data that we have here, I would expect the wind shear to continue to be a prominent thing going forward. So as we're seeing that wind shear here dominate over towards this region, I wouldn't be too concerned there. And I mean, both the models are kind of showing it at this point. If anything, it definitely aids this system over here, 95E, as we go forward. And that's going to be a prominent thing as we go into next week for sure. Now, how well 95E forms is still kind of, the jury's still out on that, I would say. But in either model here, it shows an environment that is really well suited for tropical development towards the East Pacific. As we get towards the Gulf, interestingly enough, towards the east side now, as we start to get into next week and beyond, now we're starting to see that clear out with wind shear. So maybe, depending on how our storm track is, and if we were to get a system to form on the adjacent southern end of a cold front or anything like that, there is a chance that you could get a named storm out of this. So it would be an interesting start to July. Statistically, in July, we average about maybe one storm per year, I would say. So this wouldn't be too far from the norm, but it's an interesting pattern that's starting to take shape here, and I'm going to be keeping note of that as we go forward. The date that we're looking at right now is over towards July 5th, July 6th at this point now. So as we continue to go forward, the pattern looks like it really starts to become more suitable and facultable for tropical development as we continue to go forward. So we need to be watching a little bit closer to home in regards to our tropical development in the near future here. The waters here are still warm, so it all, like I said, these warm Gulf waters here and the loop current can always create a wild card like situation. However, nothing is really set in stone. We still need to watch the other areas over here, like the main development region. Wind shear does look like it's beginning to lighten up over here as well, so I'm increasingly interested in seeing how things develop with that. But we also have to remember that not only do we have to look at the wind shear, we have to look at the moisture content. And it's the lack of moisture content towards the main development region which leads me to believe that we aren't going to be worried about a whole lot over here right now. However, as we know, things can change pretty quickly. Just a slight change in these high and low pressure areas right here, especially the big ridges and that are over towards the Atlantic right now. This shifts off further to the north or drops further south. This could greatly change things. So there's always loopholes in the forecast. I guess that's the point that we're trying to make here. Didn't want to click that. Didn't intend to pull up a sounding here, especially one that's going to really yield nothing. So a couple interesting things to make note of here. With 95E likely forming into a tropical depression or tropical storm here, it's also going to help increase that moisture content over here towards the west. So it is going to potentially aid that storm if it can sustain itself over here. That's over towards the Bay of Campeche. And then as we go forward here, we start to see that dry air kind of take over again. And then eventually, as that pattern begins to set up over the Gulf, we have the eastern half that is very active, and this is going to help increase also the shower and storm activity over towards the deep south here going forward. So within the next 10 days or so, we're going to see a further increase in activity over towards the southeast. Not like there hasn't already been a lot already. In fact, yesterday I almost got flooded out of the driveway, essentially, or the roadway that leads to me getting in and out of my home. So yeah, that was interesting. Home's fine, but that road was bad. I may or may not have a crappy video of that I might post later, but we'll see about that. But anyway, though, whether we're looking at the GFS or the Euro here, you can see pretty clearly both the models are kind of leaning into that setup here. The Euro's kind of leaning a little more against it. GFS is a little bit more aggressive with the run. But in either case here, it does look like we have a pattern that's a little bit more favorable for, more facilitable towards development in the Gulf. Over towards the over towards the main development region. Saharan dust reigns supreme and will continue to reign supreme, it looks like, from this point. So as a result, I wouldn't expect a whole lot in the way of tropical development over towards this region. Not uncommon for this time of year. It's really towards maybe the end of July where we start to see that area start to ramp up a bit depending on the pattern. But with this setup here, it's going to pretty much be almost like a solid block at this point in time. So one other thing we'll go ahead and take a look at here is we'll go ahead and look at the ensemble members here. I'll need to reset this for the GFS ensemble, unfortunately, because I didn't make another tab. Silly me. But the thing that we're going to need to pay attention to most are these two areas really at this point. I do think that there's going to be development here. We already know the deal with the Eastern Pacific at this point, and I would continue to anticipate more activity occurring over here. So I'm going to set this into loop along with this. And what we're going to be looking for particularly are these areas in the yellow that kind of pop up here. Now, the Eastern Pacific's just rocking. I mean, it's not uncommon at all. They usually get an earlier start to the hurricane season, so we're getting a little bit closer towards peak season for this region, so not really a surprise. So you can see that being reflected pretty well on both the GFS and the Euro. Now, if we were to go ahead and look a little bit further beyond into range here, we're kind of hit or miss at this point, but I do see a couple of systems trying to sneak their way over here towards the western half of the Gulf. Then eventually a couple low pressure centers with those little red numbers there, excuse me, kind of popping up towards the eastern half of the Gulf by the end of the run. So, like I said, the shift in the pattern here is going to make things a little bit more feasible for tropical development here, but like I said, nothing's really guaranteed at this point. And the other reason why I'm particularly interested in this and kind of been led to think that there might be an increased opportunity isn't necessarily because of the GFS, the Euro. I'm looking at a series of ensembles here. I'm going to go ahead and close that out here real quick. But I'm looking at a series of ensembles kind of popping up and showing low pressures continually popping off over towards this region. And this is a blend of models here. We're looking at GFS runs, we're looking at European runs, and along with other countries' some of the other countries' premier models, looking at low pressure solutions kind of popping up over here. So maybe towards the Florida coast there might be a weak tropical storm that develops here, but within the next 10 days here. But really the most favorable areas again seem to be over towards the West Mexican coast and the East Mexican coast. Outside of that, wouldn't really be too concerned about anything from that point. There are a couple outlier systems that pop up here, and there's attempts being made from the West African coast, but like I said, wind shear and the dry air is really going to reign supreme over these areas, so I wouldn't expect a whole lot out of them. But that's pretty much it for this video. A little bit of information to go over there on this one, so it's a little bit longer than the last tropical outlook, but things are starting to pick up here. Just a reminder that we are in hurricane season from Mother Nature here. But that being said, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. Smash that like button and obliterate that subscribe button. I will see you guys a little bit later with another video as we're heading towards July the 4th. Till then, everyone take care and have an awesome rest of your day.